Everybody, welcome to Eden. Let's stand and worship together. We're glad you're here. It's going to be a good night of worship. Well, let's sing together. We're clearing off the surface. You're coming into focus. Back to the basics, the glory of your face is the reason why we do this. It's all about Jesus. Our priorities are changing. Our priorities are changing. We remember why you made us. There were all sons and daughters just dancing with our Father. It's not that complicated. Come on, sing it out. It's all about you. It's all story of impossible miracles. It's all about you. Every story of a prodigal coming home. It's all about you. Every story of revival, I know. It's all about you. Your kingdom's all about lives changed, empty graves. It's all about you. Sing it again. Every story of impossible miracles. It's all about you. Every story of a prodigal coming home. It's all about you. Story of revival, I know. It's all about you. Lift it up. Your kingdom's all about lives changed, empty graves. It's all about you, Jesus. It's all about you. It's all about you. Always has been. Always will be all about you, Jesus, it's all about you, it's all about you, always has been, always will be all about you, always has been, always will.
Hello, ladies of Cincinnati. How are we doing? Well, my name is Brandis.
My name's Katie, and we're
And
so glad you're here.
we are.
Both are. We really are.
We can't wait to welcome you.
Do you guys want to take a seat? We have just a few things for you.
So if it's your first time or if you need a little bit of refresher, Eden is our women's ministry here at All Church, and it's really just a night of beauty, belonging, and becoming. We want you to see your beauty in Jesus. We want you to feel like you belong here. This is a place where there's a space for you, and none of us have it together. We are all continuing to become who Jesus wants us to be.
That's exactly right. And we're all on that journey, this faith journey of becoming who Jesus wants us to be. And we're looking in this ministry of Eden of how can we equip you guys to do that? Something we've received requests for over and over is how can we meet together as women outside of these quarterly or every once in a while events that we have. And so we're so excited to tell you guys that we're going to be doing a summer book study open to the women of Cincinnati. I forgot my prop, but there's a book, and it's called Why Do I Do What I Don't Want to Do? And I practiced that over and over again. But it's by Jonathan Pokluda. Here it is, my prop. And this is going to be an amazing book study. We already have 5 women who have signed up to host different gatherings of this book study throughout the summer. And so we'd love for you to consider joining if that's something you've been longing for, just to connect with women over unified content, just to meet new people. We'd love for you to consider joining. And if you're like, hey, wait, no one asked me if I wanted to lead, you still have the opportunity to do that too. So all of that information can be found at allchurch.com or out at Guest Central on our little iPads. There's more information about the different times that each group is going to be meeting.
I've followed Jonathan Pokluda for a while on Instagram, and he's an amazing figure. Do any of you follow him? He also has written a couple of other books you might have heard of, Outdated or Welcome to Adulthood. And so we're just so excited for this opportunity to dive into his newest book that is really shaking things up. So before we continue worship, how about some giveaways?
Free stuff.
Okay, let's start by having you look under your chair, see if you got a slip of paper.
It's a trick.
Y'all, that
She's
is
tricking
such
you.
an old way to do giveaways. We are not doing that. I'm kidding. We figured that we would allow you all to get to know a few of the faces in the crowd a little bit better. That was
Like,
so
you
much
should see
fun.
the look on your face. You looked under your chair.
All right, so what's our first question? Amy Doyle is here to help us with some giveaways. So we have 6 beautiful items from Hosanna Revival to help you with your journey with Christ. And so it's journals, Bibles, all the things. And so we're going to give them just in order. 6 things, and the first question is...
Yeah, we're going to ask you questions. We're going to make you work a little bit, have you raise your hand if you think you have the correct answer or you think you could win. So the first thing is, who thinks they drove the farthest to be here? I know Amy came from Lebanon.
All right, we got a hand. How far did you drive?
That's a good start. From where? Okay, you win.
Yeah, totally.
That's great. Free stuff. That's great. Too easy.
All right, question 2. Who was born on November 2nd and today is celebrating their half birthday?
Nobody?
Is anyone have a birthday today?
Actually.
Okay, how about May 3rd?
Guys.
May 4th? Birthdays in May. All right.
Okay.
Closest date to today. What are you? 18th?
May 12th for Liz.
You already got one. May 8th?
May 8th in the back.
Yeah, I think that's
pretty good.
closest. All right, May 8th.
Sad for the November 2nd people. We were really trying to give them something tonight. Okay, this next question, when we were brainstorming, Becky and Brandis said, Katie, you should come up with questions, and all of my ideas were like this. Who thinks they got a traffic violation most recently?
Can it also be a speeding or a parking ticket?
I think yes.
Okay.
Be brave. I want to hear about it. Okay, what do we have? Friday? That's recent. Can anyone beat Friday?
No one else raised their hand, so you win, sister.
Okay, come on up. 3 points on your license and a free Bible
I
study.
just appealed a parking ticket and I won, so I feel like that was a huge deal. I feel like I never win when I appeal parking tickets. Okay, who was born the furthest away? All right, give us a try. Guatemala.
Okay.
Anyone further than Guatemala?
I don't know geography well
not-
enough
yeah,
to
I
know
don't-
if anything's farther.
We don't have a
than
map, so
California
all right.
could be
That's our
farther.
winner.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Next up, we got
Okay,
2
next
more. Hang
question.
with us.
Who thinks they were on a plane most recently? Okay. Were either of you on a plane today? When? The 19th? She went? Okay.
Right.
Congratulations, you flew.
All right, last, if
Last
you have a
one.
fitness tracker, an Apple Watch, or something like that, and you think you walked the furthest or took the most steps today. Let's start with 5,000 steps. Look at your little
5,000
tracker.
steps, too easy.
Okay, 10,000 steps. Okay,
Anybody?
we still got one. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, 15,000.
She's checking right now. She's
Oh,
jogging in place.
did you drop at 15? How many you have?
Wait,
11? What about you?
11,000? And then
Oh,
right here?
she wins. She is like,
12,000. Okay, we have to prove it, but you might have won.
all right, come on up.
I mean, you can take that up with the Lord. Awesome, guys.
Thank you all for
Yeah,
playing.
thanks for playing our games. That's always a fun part for us. We hope that you'll continue. First of all, let's stand together. We'll continue to worship. We think we're going to have a really beautiful night together. And then once we're done singing, when our amazing speakers come up, be sure to give them a very warm welcome.
His power unravel battles right in front of me. There's a faith that stands defiant, sends Goliath to his knees. I've seen His praise unravel shackles right off my feet. That's the power. That's the power of your name. Just the mention makes a way. Giants fall and strongholds break, and there is healing. That's the power that I claim. It's the same that rolled the grave. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus. There's a hope that calls out courage in the furnace unafraid. The kind of daring expectation that every prayer I've made is on an empty grave. That's the power of your name. Just the mention makes a way. Giants fall and strongholds break, and there is healing. That's the power that I claim. It's the same that rolled the grave. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus. Taking ground, I see you press ahead. Your power is dangerous to the enemy's camp. You still do miracles. You will do what you said. For you're the same God now as you've always been. I see you taking ground. I see you press ahead. Your power is dangerous to the enemy's camp. You still do miracles. You will do what you said. For you're the same God now as you've always been. Your spirit's breaking now. Your kingdom burning in. Your victory claims the ground that the enemy had. You still do the miracles. You will do what you said. For you're the same God that you've always been. That's the power of your name. Just a mention makes a way. Giants fall and strongholds break. There is healing. That's the power that I claim. It's the same that rolled the grave. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus. There's no power like the mighty name of Jesus.
If you all will pray with me. Jesus, thank you for this night. Thank you for what you have done here in bringing each one of these women out. And I just ask that you would just be here in this place, Lord, and that the words that are shared tonight are the words that the women specifically here tonight need to hear. I thank you for giving each one of us a story that you've written the ending before we even walk through it. And so tonight, I pray that with boldness, that we come and we just lift your name and we listen to the things that you have to say. And Lord, I just pray that in all things and in all that we do tonight, Lord, that you would be glorified and that your name would be at the center of every thought, every emotion, every prayer, every desire of tonight. Thank you so much, God, for what you are doing and what you will do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Becky, and I'm the Eden lead. We have an amazing group of women who help put these nights together. And if you haven't been to one of these Edens before, they're always something a little bit different. Many of you were probably here for our Christmas one, which is kind of like a concert. We usually bring in an act and have a ton of vendors. And then there are other ones, sometimes we bring in a guest speaker. And sometimes, like tonight, we're going to hear from someone who is right here in our house. And I'm so excited. This was actually Eden May 2020. So if you can take in the visuals and we actually had to change the graphics because our church name at the time was Passion. So it's been that long since this Eden was planned. And the person who's going to share her story tonight was planned on sharing it back then in May of 2020. And a lot has happened even since then. But what's going to be a little bit different about her story is that we are used to having people on stage who have often this great redemptive story of kind of like a beauty out of ashes story. And those are wonderful. And we love a good comeback story, right? So we love to hear those kinds of redemption stories. But, sometimes we have stories of faithfulness. And sometimes those stories where we have spent years of our lives following Jesus and being obedient to his call get overshadowed sometimes by the prodigal ones. And so tonight we're going to hear a story from someone who has a lot of color to the chapters in her life. But we're also going to see how the fact that she has lived a life of obedience and how God's favor and hand over his life has just been woven in and out of every detail. So I'm going to welcome my dear friend and sister, Amber Ayers, up to the stage. She is also, yes, you can clap as she comes up. We need another hand. And she's one of the directors in AC Kids. She does a lot of things around here. She's been part of my world for, I don't know, over 20 years? Yeah, are we there? I think so. Are we at the 20? Yeah. Have we had our 20th anniversary?
I think so.
Maybe. So we've been raising babies and walking through life and going through many things together. So we're going to hear her story tonight. And like I said, let's go ahead and get situated. Yeah. Oh, we'll just make ourselves comfortable. This table's a little bit small. But we're going to hear her story. And many of you who know Amber and have been around her would be shocked to know that she's the person who she is out of the circumstances from which she has come. So I'm going to not even give any background and just let you kind of dive into the story of your life and the twists and turns and how God's hand has been on it throughout all of your years.
So we obviously don't have time for all the stories of my life because we'd have to pack our pajamas and it would be a lock-in. So I have my notes here because I have to stay on task. But I'm going to actually throw it way back and start actually how I was conceived, because that lays the foundation for really the rest of my life and the trajectory of the rest of my life. So my mom got pregnant with me when she was 16 years old. I do not know who my biological father is. My mom was wild and still is. And even at a young age, she was sleeping around at like 14. I think she lost her virginity at 12. It's really unfortunate. But she got pregnant with me when she was 16, and the story from her has changed a couple times, so I really am not quite certain. But She says that she was in a relationship, as much as you can be at 16, with a man, and he was of legal age. And so when she found out she was pregnant, she did not want to tell him for fear that, I guess, he would get in like legal trouble or something. So she didn't even tell him, and she said she broke that relationship off. And so within this friend group that she had was another guy, young guy, that she started to date, and that's the man whom I call my father today. And so she started to date him, and she then tells him, by the way, I'm pregnant, and it's not yours, but I got a really great idea. And she thought it was a great idea. She said, I'm going to have to tell my mom that I'm pregnant, and she made the decision at that point to not abort me. And she said, so because I'm going to keep this baby, she's going to ask who the daddy is. And so would you agree to claim this baby as yours? And he said, yeah. So, which is ridiculous. So they go together to my grandma and say, she's pregnant, and yes, it's mine. And so my grandma was like, well, if you made the adult decision to do the thing that, that gets you pregnant, then you're going to do the next adult thing to get married. So my mom turned 17 in November. My dad turned 19 in November. And then they got married in November. So I'm guessing she was still in high school at this time. I didn't really ask that question. I don't think my dad graduated from high school, but I don't know. Anyway, so at that point, so that was November, and so in their wedding photos, she was pregnant with me. And then I was born that next February, so I was born like 4 months later. So their relationship started out really built on lies. And so my grandma thought that my dad was my biological father, and really that decision that my mom made in that moment was really based out of fear. For different reasons, but that changed the trajectory of my life. My biological father's life has no idea that I even exist. The man I call my dad, his life, my grandparents' lives. So this small, insignificant decision that she thought she was making at the time it changed the trajectory of all of our lives.
It's so interesting because, like I said, this story was, and the theme of obedience was planned back in 2020. And it is just so interesting to me that many of you know we just lost one of the heroes of the faith, Charles Stanley, and he is famously known for a quote that says, obey God and leave all the consequences to him. And then this past Sunday here at All Church, we started a new series out of the book of Jonah, which is all about the rebellion and obedience to God. So there's definitely a story here that we're supposed to hear. And it really started for you with your mom and this decision, which led you then to a life with your grandmother that you're going to get into.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to make this point that disobedience and obedience, both things change the trajectory of your life. It changes the path you're on. So my mom chose to live a life of disobedience, and so her life went this way, and she's still on that path. If she would have lived a life of obedience, it would have been a whole nother story. But obedience changes things, and I think oftentimes we're naive enough to believe that obedience in the small things isn't significant. There's a verse in the Bible, it's Romans 5:19, and it says, for just as through the disobedience of the one man, which is Adam, many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man, Jesus Christ, so the many will be made righteous. Obedience changes things. So I just want us to never underestimate what God can do with small acts of obedience, because it can change the trajectory of our lives. I can't help but think of the story in the Bible of how Jesus came to be. And oftentimes we put all the emphasis on Mary, rightfully so. But Joseph, it doesn't say a lot about Joseph, which is Jesus' father in the Bible. It says that he was a carpenter. It says that he was righteous. But in that time when Joseph and Mary were really legally wed, they were betrothed to one another. It was like a marriage other than having sex and living together. Mary was conceived with Jesus. And I want to read this to you because I think this is very, very significant because of Joseph's act of obedience. The whole story changed because Joseph, when he found out that Mary was pregnant, could have easily in that time, and he had every legal right to put her out, to say, that's not my baby you're pregnant with, and so I can't marry you. But he didn't do that. So it says this in Matthew 1:18 through 25. It says, now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, which means like legally wed, really, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Before they came together, before they had sex. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. Means he thought about it long and hard, and he made the decision that he was going to divorce her quietly. He didn't want to make her a public example or shame her. So he was going to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, don't fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save the people from their sins. And then it says this is what I want to hang on here. It says, when Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded. He took his wife, but he knew her not. He didn't sleep with her until she had given birth to a son and called his name Jesus. Joseph obeyed immediately. He had no idea what the future was going to hold, no idea, but he stepped into obedience immediately, and it says he did as the angel of the Lord commanded. And oftentimes, I think we want to know the next steps. We want to know the next thing, like, God, what's that going to look like for me? Before we take a step of obedience, we don't have to understand completely to obey immediately. And oftentimes, God relieves us from a burden of knowledge because he is merciful. Because could you imagine if God was like, okay, Joseph, so if you really want to know, what that even the next few months or years going to look like, what's going to happen is Herod's going to decree that all babies are killed. Then you're going to have to take this pregnant woman who's just like us, hormonal, feeling super fat, her back probably hurt, and you're going to throw her on the back of a donkey, and you're going to go across town, and when you get to where you're going, you're not going to get to sleep in a Marriott. Instead, she's going to have to give birth in a stable, et cetera, et cetera. But God is merciful to us, and oftentimes he relieves us from a burden of knowledge for that reason. So we don't have to understand completely to obey immediately.
Yeah, there's so many times when I remember we were talking about this, that both of our parents said to us when we were kids, like, delayed obedience is disobedience. And it is true, kids in the room. It is still true, but God, so many times, I can't think of one time in my life in which he has asked me to do something and he has given me the outcome before I've given him the yes. He just doesn't work that way. It's our way of building trust in him. It's our way of following him blindly, really. I mean, that is what faith is. So now take us through like your childhood years, because obviously the foundation that you came into was a little bit rocky.
Yeah, so my mom ended up getting pregnant with another baby, and that would be my brother. He's 8 years younger than me. There's a story surrounding that. Y'all, I just don't have the time. I don't think that the man who I call my dad is really his dad either. My mom still liked to sleep around even when she was married. And so I have a little brother that was born 8 years later after I was born. In this season of life, we just moved a lot. I mean, sometimes like several times in one school year. And so I really didn't make a lot of friends growing up. Because I was like, what's the point? I'm going to move. Like, what's the point investing in a relationship? And my parents, they used drugs. I was probably embarrassed of my home life. And so I just kept myself distant and guarded from people. So we ended up landing at a house on the west side of Cincinnati. We lived in this little brick ranch on Banning Road off of Colerain Avenue. And it was this tiny little 2-bedroom. And this next thing that kind of happened really changed. Like, there was a shift that took place in my heart, in my life, and my family. So my parents often often fought like they were in the, I don't know if you have all watched the MMA or the whatever it's called, the mixed martial arts thing. Have you all seen that? Okay. I got a front row seat to that. I didn't have to pay for it in my own living room on a regular basis. I'm being like, I'm laughing, but it's not funny, but it is. Seriously, blood, weapons, seriously, like they fought horribly. And oftentimes it was my dad really just trying to protect himself because my mom was cray-cray. So a lot of fighting and just dysfunction. And the things that my brother and I witnessed, you know, were awful. And I could tell you stories of that. But this particular night, my brother and I shared a bedroom. It's a tiny little 2-bedroom. And we had a mattress shoved in the corner, back in the corner. And we would sleep together on that mattress. And I liked that because I could kind of watch over him and protect him and make sure he was okay. So this particular night, I woke up because I heard just a lot of ruckus, and I thought it was my parents fighting again, honestly. And so I thought, I'm just going to keep him in here. But I heard voices that just didn't sound like their voices. It was more than their voices. So I get up, and I'm trying to keep my brother corralled in the room, and I open the door, and when I open the door, there's an officer or agent standing outside the door. And so I'm like, what is going on? And I thought maybe that they were called because of the fighting and a neighbor called or something. I don't know. Because my mom would streak down the street naked when she was high on something. And so I thought, well, it's another phone call for that. I don't know what's going on. So I go out, and there he is, and my brother toddles out. And so I take a step into the hallway. And when I took a step in the hallway, to the right, I saw my mom handcuffed to the chair. And to the left, I saw my dad sitting on the couch. So to tell you what happened, my parents used drugs. And so, but they were presented, and I recently talked to my dad about this actually and asked him, like, how did this happen? They were presented with an opportunity to sell drugs. And so they were able to, like, however drug dealers work, I don't really know all the details, but they were able to get, you know, the Costco bulk quantity and then like divvy it up into individual portions and sell it off. And so they were presented with this opportunity, and they took advantage of it. And so they did that over and over again, and it worked until it didn't. And so the night they got caught was a series of the gentleman that they had sold drugs to had left, and he got caught with a substantial amount on the street. And so they were like, if you want your crime or your punishment to be lessened for your crime, tell us who your dealer is, and then we'll cut you some slack. And so, of course, he ratted him out. So that then began the process of finding who these dealers were, which was my parents. And so this night that these agents broke into the house was not the same night the guy was caught. They had worked in time to find them. So when I came out and stepped out and I saw my mom handcuffed to the chair to the right, she literally is like a feral cat. And you can't get close to her. You can't trap her. You want to snuggle her, she'll scratch your eyes out. She's just not a cuddly individual. So she did not like the fact that she was handcuffed to that kitchen chair. And so she was flip-flopping around like a fish out of water. So much so, I mean, she was mad. And so she got the chair going, and she flipped the chair up. Now she's on the ground, flopping around. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, girlfriend, you are not getting out of that chair, so just calm down. And then I look over here, and I see my dad sitting on the sofa, and it just broke my heart because it was like the gravity of the situation had set in, and he was like, what have I done? And our eyes met, and he had tears in his eyes, and he didn't say anything to me, and I didn't say anything to him, but he was just looking at me like, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. He was just devastated. And so at that point, it changed things because they had to serve time. They were allowed to serve time separately. They also had to do some time in like a halfway house because of their drug addiction as well. So they didn't make them serve time at the same time because they had kids. So they let them serve time separately. So, you know, after that, just family life changed. We ended up moving. Once they served their time, we moved to Louisville for a little bit for them to like start fresh. And that we weren't there very long when they decided to get divorced. So my mom took me and my brother back to Cincinnati, and we lived with her in this little apartment complex, and I hated that because she was never home, and my brother had asthma, and it was just all these things, and I just felt stressed all the time. And so that wasn't working, so then we moved back to Louisville with my dad, and he got remarried during this time, so we moved into another apartment complex where I had two stepsisters and a stepmom, and then that didn't work, so then they got divorced, so then we moved again across town. And so this was just like constant craziness.
So
you
how
know?
old were you at this point?
So that point, moving back, I was in middle school.
Because God had providentially, which I mean, middle school, like such formative years when all of this instability is existing in your life. But God had providentially put two people in your world, which really changed the course of your life from really that time period forward.
Yeah. So my mother's parents, my grandparents, throughout all of this, they had been there. Like I didn't live with them. They lived close to us, but they had always been there for my brother and I, and did the best that they could to kind of do whatever they could to provide some type of stability in our life. And so I do want to share that you know, a lot of times kids from trauma or people from trauma, one of the character traits of them is they become hyper independent people. And so it's really like a mode of protection for yourself, where you like don't want to get too close for fear of them hurting you or out of trust. And I was one of those people. I was very hyper independent, and I still am, and I have to guard myself against it because I can push people away and all the things because I'm very hyper independent, and I will try to fit the square peg into the round hole, and I'll make it work. And so up to this point, I was very hyper independent, and I really believe God was trying to get a hold of my heart because my grandma had taken me to a camp, and she was a camp counselor, and so I attended the camp with her, and I'd heard the gospel message, the good news of Jesus at this camp, and I really felt convicted. I felt like I wanted to step into obedience, into a personal relationship with Christ. But to be honest, I was completely afraid to do that because I didn't want to be let down again. And so we got home from this camp, and I stayed the night with my grandparents and stayed in this back bedroom. They had this little spare room with a pull-out sofa that if I stayed the night, that's where I'd sleep. And I just was not sleeping well. I just was really wrestling with the fact that I wanted to trust Jesus with my life. I wanted to know that I would spend eternity in heaven with him. But on the other hand, because I was so hyper independent that I didn't know if I could trust him, and I was afraid that if I did, he'd let me down. And so because the people I trusted most let me down. And so I was just crying in a mess, and I came out into the hallway, and my grandpa was sitting in the recliner watching TV. And so he saw me crying, and he's like, "Amby, you know, what's wrong?" And so I just shared with him what was on my heart. And I'm not going to go into all the things that he said, but that night I accepted Christ as my Savior. And I do want to say this, that oftentimes God rescues us from things or out of things, but sometimes he changes us in things. And my circumstances did not change. My parents did not miraculously
Turn their lives
around and things. No, but you know what? Christ changed me in my circumstances. And I truly believe that brokenness is a blessing because it really pushes us into this God margin that I call where we end and he begins. And without that brokenness, transformation doesn't take place. And I think there's often times that and I'm guilty of this too, we want the resurrection without the cross. But without the cross, there's no resurrection. And I'm guilty of that. We're not exempt from suffering because we're children of God, because Jesus Christ himself suffered. And I want to read this verse to you. Hebrews 5:7, 8 through 9 says this: "During the days of Jesus' life on earth, He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son of God, though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. And so I think I was walking down a path this way, right, where I was walking down this path because I didn't want to be like my parents. So I was still making good choices and doing things, but the posture of my heart was different up until that point. I was heading down this path really out of fear. Anything to not be like them. Salvation changed in the fact that I now started to walk down this path out of love for Christ. It's almost like my husband, if he were to bring me flowers and be like, here, babe, here's some flowers for you. Thanks, hon. Why did you get these for me? And then he says, well, I mean, we're married and it's my duty, so, you know. I would be like, take your flowers. I don't want your flowers. But if he said, hey, babe, here's some flowers. And I said, thanks, babe. Why'd you get these for me? He's like, because I love you and I value you and I trust you. And I wanted to get these for you because I love you. The flowers are the same in both scenarios. It's the posture of the heart. And so because I was running from something, now I was running to something, and it changed everything for me. So obedience, I want to say, is really our responsibility, and kind of like that quote you had said before, obedience is our responsibility, but the outcome is God's, and that takes the pressure off of us, that we don't have to know the outcome. We don't have to know all things. Just walk in obedience and leave the rest up to him.
When we were talking about this, you had shared a letter that your grandma had given to you years later that you had written her. And I want you to share that because it really shows where your heart was.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, you could have been down a completely different path at this point, but yet your heart was still soft toward the things of Jesus. And I do believe that that was God's hand on you specifically. But tell us a little bit about that letter.
So in this season of life, I'm living in Louisville with my dad. My dad just went through a second divorce, so it's my dad, my brother, and I living in this apartment complex across town. And y'all, this was probably one of the toughest seasons of like my young childhood or my preteen or whatever, because not only was I in middle school, which y'all know, middle school is rough for everybody. Middle school is rough for everybody. So that in and of itself was a really hard season. But I didn't have my mama, I didn't have anybody there. I really was lonely. I didn't have friends. I was a minority in my school at the time, and I was, beaten. I was drug out back, pop cans thrown at my head. It was a rough season, and I didn't have my mama. I didn't have somebody there. I started my period during this time, and y'all, this was before cell phones and Google. So now, when you're young, you could just look it up. But I didn't have that luxury. I'm like, am I going to go check out a book at the library? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I told my dad, I'm like, Dad, I started my period. And so he's like, oh, okay. Well, let me think about this.
Give me your age again, because that's significant to what he asked you to do.
13. Okay. About 13 and maybe 14. And so I was like, Dad, I started my period. So he was like, well, okay, hold on. Let me think about this, So he's like, well, here's some money, and here's the keys of the car. So just drive yourself on up to the grocery store and get whatever you need. So that's what I did. I got in the car. I was like, well, I guess this is how it works. And so I drove my little butt on down to the grocery store. And when I got there, I was presented with all these options that I had no idea what they were. I was like, what? And and then of course I'm like, thank goodness for the instructions on the back. I'm reading it like, you do what with what? Like what? So I just grabbed a couple things and I figured it out, obviously. But it was just a rough season for that reason. I'm a young girl. So I was praying fervently during this season. And this is what I was going to pray. This is what I was praying for. And I brought tissue only because my allergies sometimes act up. No other reason than that. But I was praying for my mama to come back home. And y'all, I prayed hard because I thought my parents are divorced now, so my dad's single again, so maybe my mom can come back home. And so I was praying because my little brother needed her too. And so back then we didn't have text, so we couldn't text or anything, but we could write letters. And so my grandma was my pen pal, and so I'll show you here. I have a little copy of just one of the pages that she recently sent over to me so I could have it. And so I would write her letters. And I'm just going to share a couple little things from it because it just shows you where my heart was at that time. So I was telling her about I got some good grades in school and all these things. And then I said, Grandma, have you heard from Mom? If you do, will you tell her me and Sean love her and miss her a lot? And then I went on to share some other things, and I said, Grandma, on March 12th, would you just look out your back window and look up at the moon? And I'm going to do the same thing on March 12th at 9:30 p.m. And we'll look at the moon together, and we'll think of each other. And it's just like I'm there with you. And I'm sharing that because I was a young girl praying for something so hard and missing having that female relationship in my life. And I prayed really hard for my mom to come back home. And she never did, y'all. She never did. But I want to share something with you because oftentimes God's withholdings in our life are his mercies in disguise. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Amy Carmichael, but she was born in the mid to late 1800s, and she was born in an Irish Christian family. And they were a wealthy family. Her father owned a flour mill, and so she had all these wonderful things growing up. And her parents told her, if you pray, Amy, God will answer your prayer if you pray. So one night she goes to bed, and right before bed, she got on her hands and knees, and she's like, God, I know if I pray to you, you'll give me the desires of my heart, because that's what my mom and daddy told me. And so, Lord, I'm praying that you give me blue eyes. And she wanted blue eyes so bad. But Amy Carmichael was raven-eyed and dark hair. So she went to bed that night. She woke up the next morning, and she pushed her little stool over to her side table and got up and looked in the mirror and opened her eyes. And her eyes were still brown. She was like, what? I thought God answered prayer. She was bewildered. She didn't understand this, But what Amy Carmichael did not know at that time was that years later, she would be a missionary in India. And most of the people in India have dark hair and dark eyes. And the fact that she had dark hair and dark eyes, quite frankly, literally saved her life. And so God's withholding from her was his mercy on her. So y'all, I don't know why God didn't bring my mama home. It really probably was his mercies on me because my mom is cray-cray. But instead, he sent somebody else. That was my grandparents. So through prayer and a lot of things that behind the scenes that took place, my brother and I ended up visiting my grandparents every other weekend. And eventually, we were able to move in with my grandparents permanently. They got legal custody. And I really believe God worked in my dad's heart because that was really hard for him to relinquish custody of us because he felt like a failure. He really was trying to turn his life around, and at that point he was. But that was the way God answered that prayer for me, was through my grandparents.
So you're now in high school.
Yep.
And you're going to church with your grandparents.
Yep.
And getting involved in youth group.
Yep. And, okay, so that's my cue. So at this time, my grandparents went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. So we were at church all the time. And so this is actually where I met my husband because...
in youth group.
in youth group. So he was brought to this youth group with a friend that came there. And so... we met when I was 16 and he was 17. And y'all, truthfully, one of my greatest earthly gifts is my husband. For God to place him in my life at such a young age, and for us to still be married today, is God's blessing on us. Because we started dating when I was 16, he was 17, and then we dated for 2 years, and I graduated high school in May, and we got married in August. So, you know what I mean? I'm trying to think, like, I've got kids that age, and like, I would do everything. I'd tie them up and hide them in the attic if they thought they were going to get married. Like, it's crazy. My grandma did not let me wear my engagement ring. She was so
Her
embarrassed.
senior year of high school.
Yeah. She's like, you are not wearing that, embarrassing this family. She didn't let me wear it. I was like, and I listened to her. I'm like, I'm getting married. I'm not even wearing. Anyway, my grandpa talked some sense into her, and so I did get to wear my engagement ring. Oh my gosh. But truly, he is one of my greatest earthly gifts, because when he said I do to me, y'all, he inherited so much baggage. You know, he really did. I mean, and those that know him, just know him. He is fun-loving and kind and lighthearted and strong and compassionate and all these things. And he inherited all that. And he took it in stride when he said I do. But so we're married and life continues. And at this point, I'm like, yay, I get to like control my own life now, you know? So we had 3 kids. My oldest daughter is here tonight. And then 2 boys. I have one that'll be 18, and then another that'll be 15 in just a few weeks. And I think, because my oldest was born in 2001, and we met you guys
In 2003.
in 2003. So life continued, and we were just living our best lives, y'all. And until this next season of life was pretty heavy. There was a lot going on. This was like 2016, 2017-ish, I think. And we have our 3 kids that we're in the thick of raising, these young kids. I worked full-time. My husband worked full-time. We were also starting this business that was all-consuming and taking up every extra moment. My oldest daughter will tell you there was oftentimes she was at home by herself while we were working on this business with the boys, and it was just a really hard season. Also, we had left a church. We had been out for a really long time, and that was hard. There were some hurts involved in that. Y'all were starting the foundation of this ministry, what it is now. And so we were initially on that core team. And my grandpa passed away, and y'all, that was hard because he was, you know.
A rock.
Yeah. And so that was hard. So all these things are going on, right? Working, raising these babies, starting this business, trying to be involved in this ministry, my grandpa passing away. And it was during this time that I had a phone call from my dad, and it was on Christmas Day. And so just a snippet of a backstory. So y'all know I have a brother that's 8 years younger than me. My brother chose a completely different path and made choices that led to his drug addiction himself, and he lived his entire adult life as an addict. And he ended up, him and his girlfriend got pregnant, and they had a little boy named Hayden. And so because they weren't working and, you know, my brother was an addict, my dad opened his home up to them and said, well, y'all can move in with me because I don't want this little boy out on the street, so you can move in with me. So they did. So this phone call that I get is from my dad, and it's on Christmas Day because I host the holidays, mostly for my family. And he said, hey, Am, Hayden and I are going to come for Christmas. And I said, okay, which, you know, they normally did. But he didn't mention Hayden's bio mom. And so I was like, well, and I'm not going to say her name, but I said, where's bio mom? And he goes, well, she ran off with another guy. So I have not seen her in a couple months. I don't know where she is. So she left Hayden there, and my brother was doped up in the back room most of the time. So my dad still worked full time, and so he was like, you know, I can't, in my right mind, leave this little boy alone all the time with your brother here, doped up. It's not good. So can I bring Hayden over and for Christmas? And I was like, okay, sure. I mean, y'all are gonna come, but what are you trying to say? So they get there, and then he was like, and if y'all know my dad, he would give you his right arm, but he is missing a few marbles. And so he's the sweetest guy. So anyway, he said, so I'm gonna go. Do you care if I just leave Hayden here? And so I was like, well, so y'all remember, this was the time that all the things, my grandpa passed away, left this church, y'all are starting this ministry, we're starting this business, all the things. And so I'm like, this is the worst possible time to be taking in another child, especially a child that comes from trauma, because I know that's hard. So I didn't really have time to think about it, you know, and my husband and I were like, well, okay. So we said yes. And so Hayden was with us, and I thought maybe in a couple weeks BioMom would come back. And she did. And so, you know, there was a lot of drama there, I'll tell you, because I ended up having to pick him up at a crack house trailer at one point and all these things. But he eventually just became a part of our family. And that was hard because he was from trauma. He had night terrors and all the things. And my boys, my two older boys, are, you know, the bushwhacker brothers is what my grandpa would call them. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, they were just, you know what I mean? Bulls in a china shop, and Hayden was the china. He was delicate. He to this day, he whispers when he talks, and we're like, speak up, son. Like, we're just not a gentle family. And he was so gentle that I just wanted to like, rough him up. So he just didn't fit in well. He really didn't. And it was us having to adjust our lives around him. And it was hard because we were selfish and we didn't want to. And I had my perfect little family with a golden retriever, you know, and all the nice things. And this was my expectation of life. And this was shaking it up. So in this season, there were some hard decisions that had to be made. Isaiah 58:11 says this, the Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. This was a season of surrender where we had to, I mean, I had some health issues at this time, and I really believe a lot of it stemmed from stress. And so this was a season of a lot of letting go. And so we had to make a choice. And really it was me, because I'm hyper independent and like to be in control of all things and will make things work no matter what. And so I didn't want to let go of anything. I wanted to keep my job and my paycheck, and I wanted to keep running this new business, and we wanted to stay invested in this ministry and all the things, and raise this new baby from trauma. And so we had to start letting go. And my husband and I had some really hard conversations. And so I made a decision to step down from my career at that time and transition to something else, which was hard because we needed the money. So we had to make that decision. Had to make the decision to step away from being part of that initial like core team, which that in of itself, you guys, was really, really hard. Really hard, because Andy and Becky are some of our closest friends, and sometimes saying no to something good is to receive something that God has better. And I think that in that season, I was like, but this is the best thing ever. We want to be a part of it. But God was saying, Amber, are you going to trust me right now? Are you going to let some things go? surrender is a daily act of obedience. It's not giving up, it's letting go. It's saying, God, I'm choosing to release this right now so that I can receive something that you have for me that's better. And so there was a lot of surrendering in that season. But anyway, so during that time, my brother continued living the life of drug abuse, and he, I'm going to flip over here, made continual choices that just led him down a completely different path. And he eventually, last January, my brother passed away of a drug overdose. And through these Hayden has been with us now for 7 years. And these last couple years, my brother's mental health deteriorated, and there's stories I could share with you, but he passed away last January. And then we had been working on trying to adopt Hayden, and it just, for whatever reason, it wasn't working out. But then when my brother passed away, we were able to adopt Hayden this past September. And so we were able to he was really excited for his last name to be Ayers because it had been 7 years, and really it had been 7 years of 7 years of just like, for him it was hard too, because he wasn't sure what was going to happen, if his parents was going to come back. He lived a little bit in fear, and there's just a lot tied to that. But we were able to finally adopt him and make it official, which just gave us all a little bit of peace, to be honest with you. It's definitely not how I would have wanted. I would have loved for my brother to walk in obedience and live his life sold out for Jesus, but he didn't, and neither did Hayden's bio mom. But God placed him in our home. I want to share this, though, that obedience is oftentimes, it's not just a thought in our mind. It's actually an action and doing something. It's oftentimes doing the really hard thing. It's doing the opposite of how we feel. There's a verse in Psalm, I'm going to share this, and I know I've shared this with you before, and it's one of my favorites, and I'm going to share it, and then I'm going to explain it a little bit. But it's this. It's Psalms 126, 5 through 6, and it says, "Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him." This man in this psalm, I don't know what his story is, why he went out weeping. I don't know, but it could be because he tried something and it failed and he felt like a disappointment. I don't know, but he did something. He took the next step of obedience. He took that seed that he had, whatever it was that God had given him, and he entrusted it to God, and he did something. Obedience is an act, y'all. It's choosing intentionally to do the right thing for Jesus that honors him. And he took that seed and he went out with it. And he planted it. He did whatever he had to do with it. And God blessed him because it says he returned with shouts of joy, bearing his sheaves with him, bringing them home. It was God blessing his obedience in that act. Thank you. I'm going to ask you guys a question. You don't have to answer it out loud. Just answer it in your head. Do you often know why we don't keep living a life of obedience? Do you know why we often keep living a life of disobedience? And disobedience can look like many different things. How we speak, all the things. But do you know why we often keep living a life of disobedience? It's because we believe that what we have for ourselves is better than what God has for us. That's what it boils down to. I'm going to, bear with me a few more minutes. I'm going to close this out. I don't want to keep you guys here all night long. But we often live a life of disobedience because we believe that what we have for ourselves is better than what God has for us. I'm going to read this verse to you. Ephesians 5, 8 through 16. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that you do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making best of the use of the time, because the days are evil. So I don't know what the next steps of obedience look like for you. Because let's be honest, we all live pretty spoiled lives in this day and age. Maybe the next steps of obedience for you is maybe you have a really difficult college roommate that you're just having a hard time loving. And the next step in obedience for you is praying for that person, being kind to them, being patient. Maybe it's a relationship that you're in that you're not honoring God with the choices you're making in that relationship, and it's time to surrender that relationship to Jesus. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe your husband has been unfaithful. Maybe you have. Maybe it's your tongue and the way you speak to people, even your children. And you're just so quick-tempered with them. Maybe it's your time. Maybe you don't have a lot of it because you're tapped out, and maybe you have a lot of it, and you're just not choosing to use your time in a way that would honor God. Maybe it's none of those things. Maybe the next step of obedience for you is that you haven't accepted Christ as your personal Savior. Because your bills are paid, and you've got a good job, and your husband has a good job, and your kids are great, and you have your health, and you have a beautiful home. And so for you, it's like, well, none of those apply to me. But you don't love Jesus, and your eternity is not secure in Him. And so maybe the next step of obedience for you is stepping into that relationship with Him. So this is what I'm going to challenge you with. If you're struggling with what that next step of obedience is for you, pray. And y'all are probably thinking, really? Pray? Yes. I was challenged by a friend the last couple years that really helped me change my prayer life. And she said, Amber, pray. Not just in the little small things like, Lord, thank you for this meal. Bless the hands that prepare it. But pray in all things, at all times, in all circumstances. When you're doing the laundry and you're driving to work and you're taking your kids to school, just pray to God. He wants that intimate relationship with us. But also, y'all, can I challenge you to pray for the big things and be specific? I think sometimes we don't pray specific prayers. You know why? Because we don't want to be disappointed. Well, I want to let God off the hook, as if He needs us to let Him off the hook. But James 5:17 through 18 says this, Elijah was a just man, and he was a man just like us, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. Y'all, just pray. If you don't know what the next steps of obedience look like for you, I challenge you. Pray. God wants to hear from you, and He will show up in your life. So I'm going to end it on these 3 points that I want you to think about. Never underestimate what God can do with small acts of obedience. The small things are the big things, you guys. And we don't have to understand completely to obey immediately, just like Joseph. Because God's merciful, and oftentimes He relieves us from burden of knowledge. And obedience is our responsibility. The outcome is God's. That takes the pressure off of us, that we don't have to know all the things, that we can just walk daily in obedience, and we can trust the rest to Him. And then lastly, surrender is a daily act of obedience. It's not giving up. It's letting go, and there's a difference. So I ask you guys to pray and ask God what the next step of obedience is for you.
And I'm going to do that. Can we just go ahead and show our appreciation for the boldness and the beauty in Amber sharing her story? Thank you. I'm going to pray over everyone who's here. I know they're going to come move all these things, and I've left a lot of stuff up here. So sorry about that, guys. You can go ahead and do your thing. But Jesus, I thank you for Amber's story. And it's so unbelievable that your hand has been on her in such a way that she chose the small steps of obedience throughout her life that has led her to where she is today. And so tonight for these women, I pray the same thing over each one of them, because we know that obedience is small yeses in the same direction for a long time. We can't get to the end without the small yeses along the way. And so whatever that is for the women in this house tonight, whether it is a big decision, or maybe it's just to have the conversation with a friend that they don't want to have, I pray that you would give them boldness, that you would give them courage, and that you would give them the determination to step out in obedience. In Psalm 128, it says, "Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience with him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours." And so that is my prayer tonight, Jesus. And I ask that you would just light up our hearts and light up our lives in the next steps that you have for us, so that as you continue to write our story, Lord, that we wouldn't veer off in the wrong direction, but that we would just continue to make small choices that lead us directly back to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Would you stand with us for one more song of worship tonight?
Your faithfulness, I've seen you breathe life within. So I pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. Your promises never fail. I've got stories I'll live to tell. So I pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. You left the throne and chose the cross, laid down your life to rescue us. The Savior then, the Savior now. But and I'm confident I'll see it again and again. You love and I've witnessed it. You heal and I've witnessed it. You save and I've witnessed it, and I'm confident I'll see it again and again. You're good and I've witnessed it. You're strong and I've witnessed it. You're constant, I've witnessed it, and I'm confident I'll see it again and again. You love and I've witnessed it. You heal and I've witnessed it. You save and I've witnessed it, and I'm confident I'll see it again and again. I've witnessed your faithfulness. I've seen you breathe life with me. So Lord, pour out my praise. God, you're worthy. God, you're worthy of all of it. Your promises never fail. I've got stories I live to tell. So Lord, pour out my praise. God, you're worthy. God, you're worthy of all of it. To the broken, I've witnessed it. To the hurting, I've witnessed it. To the lost, I've witnessed it. And I'll tell them this. I'll tell them what I've witnessed. To my family, I've witnessed it. To my city, I've witnessed it. To the nations, I've witnessed it. And I'll tell them this. I'll tell them what I've witnessed.
Guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you were encouraged, and look out for the book studies to come. And we will see you hopefully next Sunday. Have a great night, guys.